Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Catributor podcast, and today Jedi is back, or maybe it's Sam posing as Jedi, we will never know. Yeah. No guest tonight though, so we can...
We did try this week, but it was... it sometimes takes a little bit to hear back from people, so we were unsuccessful with the couple of people we tried this week, so just us for a change. Because... you know, that would be so different from all the other ones that we've done where we're both in it, I suppose. Anyway.
Yeah,
so there's not so much news this week, but there are some things, you know, ongoing events that there are to talk about. And we do have one article we're going to cover, which is quite a substantial one.
I mean, the newest thing right now is Black Friday.
Yes, you could hardly fail to have noticed that if you've logged into the client at all. There's even a special port.
Yes. And you can now gamble to your heart's content. But at least you can see your odds.
Yes, this is the interesting thing, is that we now see odds for each and every item. So for every Black Friday container, it's the odds of getting a ship out of it are 12%, which is probably a bit better than I was expecting. I mean, it's still not great, but 12%'s not terrible.
I mean, there is a great article on Reddit for the math, right? So I think you need like 19 containers until you have a 90+% chance to actually get a ship. So keep in mind that statistics, like 12% doesn't mean that after like 10 boxes you'll guaranteed to have a ship, or like 9 boxes, so that's not how statistics work. So keep always that in mind, right?
That's 12% every single time you're opening a box. It's not kind of but there is I'm pretty sure, is it with Black Friday we've got the pity mechanic in play finally, or is that going to be
that's a good
boxes?
Question.
I remember them talking about the pity mechanic, and I can't remember if it applies to...
They said something.
Yeah.
But I don't think so. I mean, I haven't seen anything about but you know, I might have missed it. They said that they want to introduce like a pity mechanic, but I'm not sure if that's in place already or how it works.
Yeah.
You would think that they have plastered a lot over it if it's there.
So we've got a couple of new ships. There's the Dunkirk B, Pommern B, Saipan B, Loyang B, and the big ticket item is the Yoshino B. And there's actually a note on there saying it might be subject to further balancing changes if you buy it. So there is that kind of...
I mean, they've just finally accepted that even premium ships might need rebalancing, which would have been good if they'd started from doing so. But that's one of the good things that came, I think, this year, that they finally be like, yeah, okay, maybe premium ships need rebalancing after all.
I mean, if they keep a cautious approach to it, I will definitely prefer that as opposed to War Thunder, which almost... and other games as well, I'm sure, do this. I think League of Legends kind of sort of infamously does this as well. They almost do a bait and switch where they sell a vehicle and it might perform really, really well, and then, you know, the people that buy it get to enjoy it being overpowered for a while, but then they just kind of nerf it to the point where it maybe isn't worth playing anymore. And War Thunder's done that over and over and over a whole bunch of times, and I'm pretty sure League of Legends is known for nerfing heroes a bit after they've released and after all the initial sales are over, coincidentally. I will give Wargaming that they don't do that, but yeah, sometimes ships do need a bit of rebalancing.
I mean, there is the thing that once you release something, like the company obviously a bit overpowered sales, right? So companies design things to be more on the stronger side, but they often don't get the balancing right because they lack the data of a widespread release. So, I mean, it's probably partially because they know that they need to make something a bit too strong for it to properly sell or entice people.
And this would be fine if they would let people play, you know, stuff on the test server and they could get data out of the new ships. And I'm sure if they were allowing people to play upcoming premium ships, more people would play in the test server to see what they're like. But then,
yeah, I mean, they could even test it before they buy it. Imagine
yeah, but wargaming's not quite that consumer friendly.
that.
Not by a long shot. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything else. I haven't actually checked Reddit for news on Black Friday stuff, but
All I've
yeah.
seen was that one article basically that like did the chances. It's I think fairly highly upvoted there.
Yeah, the Dunkirk is a bit different. The rest of them that you just buy, but the Dunkirk is at the end of one of these little chains, and it doesn't seem like it adds up to that much. Although I haven't actually toted it up, so it's going to be a couple of thousand gold to get to the point where you're getting the Dunkirk for the 2,000 gold. But yeah, I mean it's also with the 6-point commander and a slot, and you get everything before that point. So if nothing else, it might be worth going for that. But I'm not sure how it works out maths wise versus buying a normal Dunkirk.
That also I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's Black Friday as we expected. I just would tell people, like, beware of your odds if you gamble, and be aware that you can just buy the ships outright if you want a specific ship.
I mean, if I was going to point at any of them that I would say, hey, maybe consider this in particular. I mean, the Lo Yang with the discount off a normal tier 8 price, and the Lo Yang is still a good tier 8 destroyer. And that was probably the best kind of bang for your buck. But I mean, if you haven't bought any of the previous ones, then those are all still available too. So there's things like the Scharnhorst B or the Otago B are also, I would say, pretty decent value. Or if you really want a battleship, the battleships are definitely cheaper than the regular premium cost. So even if you wouldn't get there was something about the missions thing, because previously it's been you only got the special missions if you owned both versions of the ship. There was something about that, and I forgot what it is.
Yeah, but previously it was like if you bought the black version, you got the mission, even though you might not have had the original ship, because the idea was to get a discount if you have both. And now you only get the mission if you have both, and you can complete them with both ships, right? So if you have like the regular Massachusetts and you buy the black one, you get the mission, and you can complete it by playing the black one.
Okay, so there is some benefit if you have both, but I mean, if you're just looking to pick up a discounted tier 8 premium, I mean, the price of going up between tier 8 and the tier 9 ships is a pretty steep difference. But yeah, I would say some of them, if you've got the doubloons sat around and you desperately want a Massachusetts or a Tirpitz or an Otago or a Cossack or Lo Yang, then this is probably a decent time to buy one, because it's not that often that you get any kind of substantial discount on premium ships.
It's still a shame that they don't just sell like the black cam when they make the ships. But
yeah, that would be nice. I mean, I suppose the best you could do is the black consumable camo, but yeah, it's not quite the same. And clearly, I mean, they did it this way just because they figured this is going to make them more money overall.
Yeah, it's also like the discount that you get if you have both is like an indirect one, right? It's not that, you have a Lo Yang, now you can buy a black Lo Yang cheaper. It's like, okay, you have a Lo Yang, if you buy the black one, you get a mission to get some doubloons back. But you've already spent the money to them. Now you have doubloons to spend, which is nice, but they ensure that you still have to pay the full price for the ship that you already have, just because you like the black skin more, in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, apart from the discount, it's probably less appealing because you're not going to get any benefit out of that, as with the like having both of them and having then the missions potentially. But if you don't really care about that, it's a discounted, high-tier premium ship. So it's from a consumer point of view, I think it's not bad. And the fact that we now have the actual drop odds on the Black Friday containers themselves, I think overall this is not a bad event from a consumer point of view overall.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to gamble, you can gamble. If you want to buy them directly, you can buy them directly, and you can get some ships at a discount. So I don't have strong feelings about the event either way, I guess. I'm slightly sad that, as I said, that the black thing isn't a camo. But other than that, fair enough, I'd say.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of monetization that overall just feels...
That feels okay, right? I
mean,
mean,
it feels relatively fair. And, you know, that's probably the best you can ask for in a free-to-play game.
True.
Realistically.
Well, I mean, I guess we can move on then to basically super ships and arms race, because we've now had some time to actually play them. Well, I mean, I haven't really played super ships. I've watched other people do it.
Yeah,
I've played arms race though.
Same here. I've not actually gotten. I've got 3 of the 4 tokens needed to unlock a super ship, so it's. Yeah, I guess I can just try a ranked battle to get that 4th token that I need. But as for arms race, yeah, I've played that, and I've been. I mean, it's arms race. I've been quite enjoying it overall. I don't know if there's anything super substantially different about it this time around. I still would like to see it, especially as it's restricted to tier 9 and tier 10 only. I would really like it if it was something that would just come in the random rotation every so often. Instead of being its own separate mode. But that's personal preference, though.
I mean, they said that they are testing arms race and they want to... I mean, in I think a while back in Devblock Wargaming said they want arms race as part of the random battle rotation, which I would like. Okay. Because, you know, now and then it just mixes things up a bit, and eventually people would actually... No, okay, they won't learn that objectives are important, but...
It's not too different than... well, I mean, you kind of start off on it being not too different than... domination games, but then
it's snowball. Like in domination, if you don't get a cap early, you are not out of the... I mean, I've won plenty of games through points, right? You have to get caps eventually, and if the enemy gets over a critical point, then you probably lose even if you take the ships back, in a sense, right? But it's more slow, right? If in domination you just fail to get a cap early, it's fine, as long as you get it in time, right? In like arms race, if the enemy just gets too many buffs, then it snowballs quite heavily. So in a sense, the biggest issue with arms race is that it can snowball quite heavily and maybe make more one-sided battles. But on the other hand, with the heal and so on, I think it also has the potential to like if your ship is low, you can basically fall back, and if you have a heal, you can heal back up again and come back. So I don't know, it has the potential to snowball very heavily. It also has the potential to create longer battles if people play conservatively and get the right buffs.
I mean, it's definitely got a different pace of play. And I mean, it kind of is. It sort of sits in between domination and standard games, with the fact that you get the cap circle appearing after a while, and then well, maybe not even standard games, more like Epicenter or something like that, where it all becomes focused around that one point. But yeah, I kind of like that more initial skirmishy play style, and especially in a destroyer.
I mean, the thing is that obviously if you don't have a ship that can go for the objectives, you're entirely at the mercy of your team, because, I mean, that's probably one of the, in a way, downsides of arms race, is that it gives destroyers even more carry potential than they usually have by going for objectives, because if you're like in a battleship, you can't just... Like, I mean, some buffs appear relatively on your side, but most buffs you can't just sail a battleship into them. So if
Although
a
I've seen
destroyers are
people
unwilling,
try.
yeah, sure. And you probably have deathstruck them in your destroyer and had a good laugh about it. But it's the thing where, you're a bit more on the mercy of your destroyers. So I can understand that if people who primarily like to play like other ships might not be as enthusiastic about this.
I've definitely seen, like, I've only played a couple of games today, and there were, I think, 2 or 3 of them where there was only 1 or 2 cruisers per side. So cruisers seem to be not a hugely popular choice overall. Lots of battleships and sometimes plenty of destroyers, but then again, I have had 1 or 2 where there's only been a single or 2 destroyers per team, especially if there's only 1 destroyer. It definitely slows things down. It slows things down an awful lot because if they misplay and get themselves taken out early, that can have a fairly dramatic effect because the other team then has a much easier time grabbing the more central buffs.
I mean, I feel like the problem that cruisers probably have is that the buffs aren't favor them that much in a sense, right? The battleship is in a way very durable if you don't get deleted by torpedoes or shuffle broadside or something like that. But even that, you might have a better chance of surviving than a cruiser, right? So getting the more hit points is nice for a battleship, getting the heal, right? Because battleships tend to be, a lot of people play the battleships fairly passive. So that gives them even more tools to stay longer in the game and profit from the buffs very well, while cruisers have always the chance of getting deleted. And if battleships have more staying power, that cruiser is always, no matter how many buffs it gets, it's always just one, death struck away, right? Even if it angles, with the overmatch, the higher tiers, every cruiser have to constantly fear that one battleship salvo will end it. So I feel like they might be profiting a bit less from the buffs. Even if they get the more hit points or so on, it's, it doesn't really matter if the citadels come rolling in.
Yeah, I mean, I have tried 1 or 2 cruiser games, and it has been purposefully in the more armored, long-range cruisers. I don't think I'd like to try it in something really squashy like the Goliath.
Yeah, it's also that with the points more shifting, right? You'd have to reposition more because a lot of the cruise in Mono, so you want to get that right island where you can maybe radar that cap and can lob the shells and so on. But with the points shifting, the combat shifts a lot more. If you wanna be relevant to the objectives, you have to reposition a lot more, and there's a lot less chance that you find that great position or that great island. I feel like.
I mean, yes, and also especially with the more island campy cruisers.
Yeah.
The fact that the battle tends to shift around more over time as the different buffs appear in different places, and then you get the central cap circle. It kind of shifts the focus around. And if you're just sat behind one island the whole time, the battle can end up kind of moving elsewhere where you can't actually shoot anything. So, I mean, a lot depends on the map that you get as well. Some maps are going to be better.
Yeah, and where exactly the buffs spawn.
Yes.
And if you brought a smoke cruiser or a smoke destroyer with you to smoke, that helps a lot always. But yeah, I mean, overall, I hope that Arms Race becomes a permanent addition if they, especially if it reduces the times I get standard battle.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm glad to see it back, and also quite glad there's no submarines. Not many carriers.
Oh, I've seen a lot of carriers.
Well, maybe I've just been lucky.
And then we obviously have the super ships, which, I mean, what I've seen of them, it's rather ridiculous and ludicrous to watch at times. I feel like there needs to be a lot of balancing still done. It's, I mean, somebody sent me 2 Annapolis replays that I've watched today. Got the crack both of those games, and it's oh, there is a cruiser that is in the process of turning. Let me just delete that. Oh, there is a cruiser that has shown broadside for a second. Oh, let me just delete that. it's like the amount of shells that you can let out with the burst mode is just insane. Like it makes like a Minotaur look like a toy, and it's not like small guns either.
No.
So I mean, there's probably a lot of work to be done to properly balance those ships. So we'll just have to see. They might have gone slightly too ridiculous with some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely still in the tuning phase. I mean, it's probably overall a good thing that they have limited the number that can be in game in at any one moment. I mean, far more so than subs. And the fact you're only getting a 1 day rental at a time, so it's a way for them to get data, I guess.
Yeah.
But if you're on the wrong end of it, it's still going to be potentially quite.
I mean, it's still sad. I'm using, I want to call it, that this is basically in ranked because they have dropped every pretense. I mean, they've dropped in the past, but it's like becoming clear that it's basically there is alpha testing that is ranked, and there is beta testing that is random battles, and then there is never going to be a finished World of Warships again, I think.
Definitely a lot less emphasis on the test server, but I don't know. They've just, I think, for a lot of people, never quite made it worth the while to have a whole separate, spend the time downloading the client and actually playing sufficient.
I mean, for the longest time, you needed a different account even.
Yeah, and the fact that, this is actively taking away from time you could be spending trying to grind out missions, perhaps, that you're, trying to do on the live server. There's no kind of tie-in between the two. So, yeah. I mean, these days, at least I think you get the community tokens, whatever it is called.
Yeah. But it feels like that they always approach the tester a bit from the wrong thing. It feels a bit like the operations, right? Basically, Wargaming didn't provide people with a proper reward for their time because they basically wanted people to actually playtest their game, right? They wanted to do them a job in a sense, but they weren't willing to give a proper reward. And then they were like, well, nobody does it. And those people that do it, I mean, on the one hand, yes, people play different on the test server anyway because they're trying out new stuff that they don't really have on the live server, and they might just use it to test a ship that they don't have unlocked. And they care a lot less about their stats because it's a separate server just for fooling around for them. But on the other hand, they also never really gave people a reason to go through the trouble of downloading another client, and they never made it that easy or obvious to access. They never made it that rewarding to do so. And then they always wondered, well, we aren't getting a lot of data from it.
At least it's a way for us who aren't in the program anymore to play around with these ships and have a look at what they're about. I mean, you can always look at stats, but that's not the same thing as actually getting to play it. So, which one are you most particularly interested in? Because I think I've had my eye most on the Carno, not just because of that funky split funnel that's going on.
I mean, interested. Obviously, I like my brawling battleships, so the Hanover, it's just a bigger... the Hanover feels like the natural, in a way, evolution of a Kurfürst. It's just a bigger Kurfürst in a sense, right? And it has something that boosts the secondaries, and I like that secondary playstyle, so the Hanover is basically right up my alley. And then there is obviously my favorite ship in the game is the Shimakaze, so the Yamagiri looks kind of inviting to me. The biggest issue I've always had with the torpedoes is, the 20-kilometer torpedoes are in a way a niche case, right? There are situations where I'd like them, like when you're on the ocean, which happens once a year. And it never you bring them because you hope it will be this one fun game where the 20s actually matter, and it never is, right? Because we've all had a 20-kilometer game that was hilarious in the past, and we hope to recreate it, but it's just never a good choice. And if you have that option, right, within a battle, that you can switch which types of torpedoes you have, that's a cool feature. And I feel like that would be something that they could do to other ships as well.
I mean, I would honestly like in terms of it being range and speed a bit, and obviously that probably affects the concealment of the torps as well. But if you could switch between regular torps and deep water torps.
I mean, the thing about deep water torps is that they
I know
won't really.
They're less useful against a lot of targets, but the increased concealment might help you in some situations.
Yeah. I mean, switching between normal and deep water would be an amazing feature, but the concern is that I feel like deep waters are in a weird place because they are so stealthy that it makes dodging them so incredibly hard unless you have Hydra and so on. Deep waters are easily too punishing in a sense. Like, I feel like deep waters have never been the most.
Well, the Japanese ones, anyway, the Asashio's ones, which do so much damage.
So, I mean, obviously you can balance a lot of parameters by them, but
yeah.
I mean, it would make deep waters a lot more interesting if you could switch to regular ones if you need them. But I feel like alone that you can play like with the range of the torps, you get like worse ones, but they are longer range and then better ones for close combat and such that you can pick the right weapon for the right opportunity.
No,
I feel like that's nice.
Yeah, it's definitely one I'm one of the ones I'm more interested in looking at myself.
And such, I mean, there's something like the Annapolis. I like my Des Moines, so it looks like a ship would be in a sense hilarious, but I don't know. It's I mean, I'd have probably a laugh in it.
Like they would have something going for them, well, some more than others, but yeah, I don't know if there's any of them that I would point at and go, well, that's just awful. But some of them I don't really have enough of a reference to their contemporaries, like the Zorki, for instance.
Yeah, I couldn't judge a Zorki properly. I'm also not that interested in the Conde because I'm not really that much into the French playstyle, I guess. The thing that concerns me about the whole autoloader thing, and also in a way like the Satsuma, like accuracy boost and so on, I feel like they're going more towards like extreme burst damage, and that's always a problem, right? Especially if it's then focused on like a tier 9 or so, even not just a tier 10. I mean, it's like getting one shot is never a fun game mechanic. If you basically
I can't help but think of the was it the French destroyers? It would have been when we were very first testing those way back, and the initial reload booster that they had was completely OP. Like you could trigger a reload booster and gun down a destroyer almost to it dying. And if it had already lost some hit points, then it was a guaranteed kill pretty much. So yeah, I mean, it's not like we haven't had experience of this before, and they should be aware of the potential for these kind of burst reload mechanics to make the gameplay really not fun for other people. So yeah, hopefully they have that lesson in mind, but I guess we'll see.
I mean, the thing is, what I've seen from the Annapolis is, right, so generally you're better off not using like your burst thing if you wanted to go for damage over time, right? But if you just see, you can, like, if your guns are reloaded, you can easily switch instantly to the other fire mode. And then you just have to go through the long reload once you've fired your guns, basically. But it's like you run around in a normal mode, you see somebody is turning broadside, and if somebody turns broadside, you only have like this short, window of opportunity before they make the turn. And you just go to your burst fire and you put like a bazillion shells into them, and they just instantly are deleted. And it's like, I look at this and I have a laugh, and then I think like, is this really what the game needs, though?
I suspect this is heavily influenced by the auto reloader tanks in War of Tanks, especially the Italians, where it's that exact thing of you can fire all your shells, but it ends you get that burst damage, but you can end up with a much longer reload. And it can be really horrible to be on the other end of that, because somebody just pops up and pow, 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 puts 3 or 4 shells in and takes a huge chunk of your hit points all at once. And yeah, it's nasty. It really is nasty. So I don't know if I especially want that in World of Warships, but I'll have to maybe play the Annapolis to see if it feels quite as nasty as some of the Italian tanks do.
I mean, we'll have to wait and see. What I also have to say is, with your comparison to tanks, in tanks at least you're sort of vulnerable, right? Because a tank is usually easier to destroy or faster to destroy than a ship, unless the ship goes for broadside or something, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like in a tank you are much more vulnerable if you go through the reload of being rushed or being taken out or being in a bad spot, while in a ship, going through like a bit of a longer reload is usually not that big of a deal.
Especially, I mean, it depends on the like how stealthy you can make it overall. If you get that chance to just do the burst reload and then withdraw, then yeah, it's not really that big of a penalty.
No, I mean, in Warships, you're much more out in the open anyway, right? In World of Tanks, you'd never like go for an open field, like shoot somebody and then just, continue on or turn away or something. Like if in World of Warships, that's a very common thing, right? So being like not able to shoot back and I mean, it's not like the reload is that long, but having this slightly longer reload while you are like sailing out there is not going to make that big difference, I think, in Warships. But in tanks, you might just be really vulnerable and get gunned down in that period.
Especially I mean, it's a lot easier to use cover, hard cover. I mean, that's kind of not taking smoke into the equation, but someone can pop out of cover, empty their autoloader clip, and just pop back into cover and then be fairly invulnerable, except maybe to artillery.
Or if bursting in form of torpedoes. As SJR, that's a bit different, I would say, because yes, the torpedoes can already like delete the ship in one go, and that can be very frustrating anyway. But the biggest, I guess, defense about torpedoes is that you can't aim them, like they are delayed, and that means you can't really necessarily know for certain where a ship will be, which makes gives you some countermeasures by driving unpredictably or things like that. There are certain things like Hydro that can help you. Like somebody shooting like 50 shells into your broadside in 2 seconds, there is really not show broadside is the answer, obviously. But the thing is, if like every slight turn that you make, if you show too much broadside for a second, you immediately get deleted. On the one hand, obviously you want the ships be punished for like misplaying, but there has to be a certain amount of balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is willing to like show anything anymore or peek out of anything if they the more damage there's around, the more passive sense. But it needs more testing and balancing anyway. This is just what I've seen so far. And people need to get used to playing against those.
Yeah, there's that element. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to exactly correlate the mechanics between warships and World of Tanks, but yeah, it's sort of interesting to think that there might be that influence from one to the other. I mean, there's French autoloaders as well, but they're very squashy, and they're saddled with a very long reload as well, so they kind of have to, that's all they have, so they have to put out the burst of damage potentially, and then run away and hide for the better part of a minute. So
yeah, I mean, aren't there like also US autoload? Wasn't there like the heavy autoload or something?
Yeah, there's a couple of different nations have them now. Yeah.
It's been obviously many years since I played World of Tanks, but I think wasn't there like a US heavy? I remember.
Yeah,
there was some US. Yeah, exactly.
And there's
one of the few autoloaders I had
before that, but they're kind of more like autoloading shotguns. Not very reliable in terms of accuracy, but fairly quick reload. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything like it is the Italian ones that I think closest to the Annapolis, just because you almost have that choice of fire modes where you can keep up just the standard rate of fire, or you can have that burst at a cost of a longer reload.
Yeah, I've never. Those came after my time.
So yeah, we'll see. That I think the burst damage ones definitely have the biggest potential to be imbalanced. I think I agree with you there.
I mean, we could take this as a segue to talk about balance.
Yes, that's our main topic for today. So we've got this nearly 25-minute video accompanying this article, which mostly rehashes what's in the video, I think.
Yes.
It kind of sort of condenses it down.
And I mean, it's. Once again, I like it when they share their thought process and the things with us, but it's unintentionally funny at times. Like, for example, the start, where they say to achieve it's important for each battle of equal opportunity to affect battle outcomes, regardless of the ship they choose to helm into battle. Which basically contradicts their own policy, because the thing is, they know that carriers have overproportional impact on battle. They have stats to show that. They know that. And basically they say this shouldn't be the case, but they refuse to change carriers because otherwise they don't hit their population numbers. So they already described balance as something that they are unwilling to do in the first paragraph, because they've already in the past told us that, no, the carriers need a certain population number. So basically, it's basically...
I kind of worry that subs are going to become the exact same thing as well, that they're going to get pushed around a lot and maybe overbuffed just to increase their appeal. And that, I already don't like subs particularly, the sort of subs being made like stronger just to get more people playing them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they were true to this would be amazing, right? That's exactly what balance is in a way. Yes, everybody should have about the equal importance. Like, it should be your skill that matters and not the ship that you bring in. But they are not going for that. So they are already basically...
I was kind of... Yeah, the fact that there's a whole section in the video where they're talking about that they want everybody, regardless of whether they're in a battleship or a cruiser or a destroyer, to feel like they have an equal... impact on a game, and that's actually sort of fairly far from most people's experience of playing. I would guess.
I mean, it's also like it's carriers aside. This doesn't seem to be their aim the way they design ships, because it's clear that, like, for example, a cap-focused destroyer or so might have more influence or more carry potential, as I would call it, as maybe, let's say, a French cruiser who is more likely to just be a long-range damage dealer, right? And you can certainly carry the game by doing damage, but it's a lot harder than if you have additional opportunity to take objectives and carry your team that way. It's like, I would say that like different ships already have vastly different carry potentials depending on what role they fill in the game, right? So
it was definitely a massive oversimplification. I mean, I don't know if you would want to call it being disingenuous, but it was certainly not really that close to the reality.
I mean, they simply define what balance is. That's the thing, right? This is just a definition for them what balance is, but they are not trying to achieve that, right? Basically, their own definition of balance is not something that they actually try to achieve. This is where I find it so funny. Because the first start, they already state something that's not actually their goal with what they are doing and what they have done in the past. So it makes for a great start. Well, I mean, they go on with that each player perceives fairness and balance differently. That's very true, right? Because, I mean, obviously we are all biased towards the ships that we like, and we would like the ships that we like to perform better. And then there is the fact that, you might not be properly able to evaluate how good a ship is, because maybe you've never played it, you've only fought against it, or maybe you're just inexperienced and you don't know how to properly counter something. So that is very true. You have to keep in mind.
The majority of players are also going to be, at best, working with a woefully small data set for any given ship, unless they are religiously playing the same ship over and over and over and over.
If you play like a ship for 10 battles, like if you play Battleship for 10 battles, RNG, how good like your accuracies can vary widely, right? As a person who like plays a ship, and first impression is also very important. If you play a ship like 5 battles, and RNG just isn't very kind to you, might be like, oh, this is crap. So that's why it's very important, I guess, that you take on the one hand actual statistics and on the other hand feedback. And obviously you interpret the statistics the right way, which is also a fun part because somewhere down there in the article they say that they say exactly that it's very important to take feedback into account and that community and like the developers should work together for balancing. That was exactly my point in the past that I tried to make to them because they basically ignored everything we said, right? When we were contributors and we provided input, then they were like, no, we do the balancing, not you guys, basically. They were like, you are wrong. And now they basically state exactly what we've tried to preach to them for the past years, that should be like, we should be working together. If they actually got that right now, that would be amazing. But I'm afraid that well, we will see if there's empty words at all. But maybe they finally got the message.
It is. I mean, they did make quite a big song and dance almost about feedback generally. So maybe trying to counter the sort of perceived long-running criticism that they don't listen to player feedback or CC feedback, and it almost feels a bit more like the stuff about stats is definitely interesting, and like you say, it's good to have this kind of insight overall. But there are definitely elements of this article that feel more like, dare I say, propaganda.
I mean, what I also like when you go further in the article is like they say that feedback is very important. However, the projects of Warships is very complex, and it goes even more complex with each new release. To find the cause of player dissatisfaction, we often need to solve a huge tangle of interconnections.
I mean, that part's fair, you know.
I mean,
that part's definitely fair.
Well, yes and no. If people tell you, look, we don't like smoke cruisers that have a 19-kilometer range and can spam you from half the map away, and we can't do anything about it, that's a very clear, message. That's not. They don't need to entangle why people are angry about it. It's that wargaming often just, I don't know, they don't want to accept that people actually tell them what they want or something. Wargaming is just often like no, you don't know what you want. I know what you want.
Yeah, there is sometimes that element of like sometimes there is that kind of unambiguous message about certain things. And to be fair, sometimes it's blown up over nothing, like the thing they always point to, and it's probably one of the few big examples of when there was a fairly big backlash from everybody, was when radiolocation came in, and there were some people that were predicting it was just going to be like the end of the game kind of thing, and of course that was completely overblown as it turned out. It wasn't without impact, but it was, people were sort of latched onto it as this big dramatic thing, and it didn't turn out to be anything close to that.
No, it's not like the community is always right. I'll never say that, right? That's why it also should be working together between the developers and the community, right? And I also say that statistical data is important. It's not like you should balance solely on feedback, right? But if they have, like, basically, if there is a lot of feedback, like against something like RPF, but the developers feel very strongly it's going to be fine, then what you do, the best course of action is to try it and have a backup plan if it doesn't work. Because if something like that blows up, you will feel fairly quickly if it doesn't work. Like, let's take everyone's favorite, the Jedi skill, right? And it was the same thing where the community basically told them this is going to be very bad, and Wargaming thought they knew better, like with RPF, but this time the community was right. But I feel like when you go into a situation like that, it's very easy to have a backup plan because in the end of the day, changing a skill shouldn't be very hard. Like, I'm not sure how this game is programmed, so I can't tell that, but you should make skills in a way that changing them, because you know you need to rebalance them anyway, so you definitely shouldn't make them in a way that makes them very hard to change in a sense. And you can always have a backup plan prepared, right? You'd be like, you come out with, we heard what you guys think, and we tried anyway, and if it doesn't work, we will react quickly and do this. Because if you have a backup plan, then 2 weeks later, you saw it didn't work, you already have the data, you just basically be like, okay, sorry guys, you were right. At least, you do something like that.
Yeah, it does a little bit feel like they kind of...
They were caught completely unaware. It felt like that. First, they didn't want to admit that it was wrong, even though it was obvious after 2 weeks. It took them 1.5 months, I think, to admit that the community was right, and then further 1.5 months to copy-paste another skill in. So that shows just how unprepared they were for that fact, because they didn't have a backup plan, and they were scrambled to find anything, and then they put a skill in that they already knew didn't belong at tier 4. So this was a very, very panicked thing where they didn't, they absolutely were caught with their pants down. And that shouldn't, your approach to balancing shouldn't be if everybody tells you this is a bad idea. If you still want to try it, then you at least need to have, a way out. Especially if it's so simple.
A plan B.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't really do that. Now that you've pointed out, they just kind of make these changes with... It seems quite often like the assumption of, it's just going to be, it'll be fine. We know best. It'll work out.
And
sometimes it does, but when it doesn't, it's pretty notable and pretty noticeable.
What's so sad? I feel like if you are designing new skills, that's how I imagine it, right? You have brainstorming, you have a team that goes over potential skills that you could add, and then you discuss which ones you'd like to have in the game, and you discuss how powerful they should be and where they should be going. But there is going to be a large brainstorm. You would always end up with way too many ideas, right? Some of them maybe not quite feasible, but some of them you just feel like aren't the best ideas, right? So you will always have a backup idea in a sense, right? I can't believe a situation where a big company like this doesn't get enough ideas for another skill that they cut out because they felt it's just not fitting enough. So you already have basically the backup. You already have the skill that just didn't make the cut. You're like, okay, if this doesn't work, then we will just take the other.
That would be great if they would, as part of the changes they're trying to make, if that's something they would have in mind. But I don't know if they've said anything even remotely to that effect. So
no, it's just baffling me because, I felt like the whole commander skill thing was rushed anyway. Probably they needed it for subs because there was so much potential that wasn't realized. It felt like it was just a rushed halfway. But if you make big changes, it's oftentimes not that hard to have a backup prepared if you're unsure if it's working or not. And it feels like wargaming just often is well, if this doesn't work, well, crap. You guys hang on for a few months. We'll think of something. Anyway, coming, I guess, back to the article again, they said that basically they've improved also the data gathering. They said something about server capacity, and obviously, right, if you want to collect data, there's a lot of data to collect in a given battle, and then there is even more time needed to process the data and make the right statistics of it. If you feel like your servers aren't capable of gathering live data, they could always just store replays and then evaluate them. But I guess it would still need server capacity.
Without any kind of technical knowledge, it's kind of hard to comment too deeply on this side. It would have been nice if they'd given some more specific examples about how their data collection is refined over time, because it's not just the amount of data that you're collecting, but you have to be collecting the right kind of data. It's entirely possible that you could end up with a huge data set that doesn't actually tell you anything useful.
True.
But yeah, because that was one of the points that they made, that it's something that they've significantly worked on and refined over time. It just would have been nice to have some examples of what exactly they meant by that. I mean, they did give some examples of sort of specific things at specific times. I mean, there's this Des Moines chart, and they talked about the what was it? One of the campaigns increasing the number of Des Moines that were being played.
Yes, that basically you see popular. They only show the Des Moines, but I presume the others are the other cruisers, right? And we see that when the event started, basically Des Moines spiked, and all the other ships sort-of-ish. Well, I mean, some of them went up. It could be that the other one that went up might be a booster because they said something about US cruises, right? So, I mean, the thing is obviously like that's a problem with balancing in the sense that it's fluid. If you have an event that makes more people play a US cruiser, then there might be more US raiders around, and that will affect destroyers and so on. So that's definitely a thing, right? The more popular one ship is, that might influence another ship. So balancing in a sense is complex. I feel like what I should have added in the first part, what is balancing, is that the thing is that the idea that every ship is like equally strong is nice in theory, but you can't really do that in reality because there are also too many moving factors. So in the end of the day, what you try is to get ships to be close enough, right? You might look at win rate and be like, okay, like, I don't know, 49-51, that's balanced, that's 2%. Might be a 2% difference, but we call it balance. And the eternal discussion about balancing is how big can the gap get and still be called balanced. But yeah, about the data example, that said, for example, how do you estimate how much damage battleships receive from torpedoes? I mean, that's obviously like a specific thing that you'd want to track. Or then how people with like, especially there is this skill, right, that increases your torpedo protection. So if you want to know how effective that skill is, you'd have to track data of every battleship, how much torpedo damage do they take on average, and then see how much this gets influenced by the skill and so on, right? If you want to proper balance something like specific values like that, you need a lot of specific data.
I mean, it would have. This is again an area where it would have actually. Following off that, it would be really interesting to have some examples if they'd said, our data shows X number of people use that skill, for example, and how that affects, balancing of torpedo damage or torpedo belt damage reduction or, stuff like that. So it's very sort of broad overview, but
yeah,
it would be nice to have a bit more granularity.
Yeah, especially things like what data is collected and how it's interpreted are often very important things. Like when you balance a legendary module, it's not just about how many people use it, but are the people like performing better with it than without it? And you can't just compare all people who use it with those who don't, because there might be different skill sets, right? You have to compare it to like their overall skills and stuff, or maybe how they performed with the ship before and after. And the interpretation of data is always important, because back when they talked about legendary module, a lot of the time it's just like they cared only about how many people slaughtered it or how the people who slaughtered it performed, not compared to like their own performance without it, but just to other people. It's like we need a lot more information about how they collect the data and how they use it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit. We used to collect less data. Now we collect more data. I mean, it's giving some idea of like you can sort of read behind the lines and this that old joke at this point of everything's done by spreadsheet, but it does, if nothing else, tell you quite how data driven that they are and how much they've become. About that data, and there's a lot of useful stuff in there. But I suppose that is the standing criticism, is that sometimes they seem a bit too much focused on that rather than the player experience. But that was something they touched on in the video as well. And that your experience in any given battle is it can be really, really different. That I think this specifically said at one point something like you can play 100 battles in the same ship in a row, and each and every one will be a different experience, largely. Although, you could then sort them into perhaps different categories of battles. Not every battle is that different of an experience, but it's like I almost feel like all these sections were more. How can I put this? I'm trying to marshal my thoughts here. That they're trying to manage players' expectations of how they do things, rather than kind of purely give information about how they do things, which suppose comes back to what I was saying earlier, and parts sort of feel a bit propaganda-ish.
I mean, the thing is, they go on and how they collect more data and learn better how to interpret it, but the problem is that the balancing hasn't gotten better, right? So the thing is where they like an article of, and we've improved over time, and now we just collect more data and we're able to interpret it better, and it's like, but then why don't you show any results from that? So
there are still some very questionable decisions that
the elephant's still in the room there.
Yeah.
Also, they have this, like, the new chart with the player win rate. So what the interesting thing is, I've seen this, like, also on Reddit, where people interpreted it as that bad players play more battles than the good. But what you have to keep in mind is that, like, here when you do the total battles, like this chart, this isn't like how many battles a single player played. This is like all players in this category played this ship that often in a certain time period, right? It's just that the most logical interpretation is that there are just more people in the lower brackets than there are people in the higher brackets. It doesn't mean that a good player has less battles played generally than a bad player. It doesn't mean that people who play 40k battles are on average worse than people who played 5k battles. It just means that there are more people in this category. Those are, like, the way I understand it, all of those colors are ships. Like, we're looking here at maybe like 8 cruisers. And you have, like, I don't know, in Edinburgh and Cleveland and, whatnot. And this is like, in this bracket, all players that played this ship who have this skill rate summed up. And if there are like 100,000 people in this bracket and only 1,000 people in this bracket, then it makes sense that those bars are a lot smaller there. But what I feel like this shows is that, interestingly enough, you'd expect, like, sort of a bell curve, right? You'd have very few people who are really bad and very few people who are really good, and then the most in the middle. While in Wargaming, it just seems like it's like basically a flat line, and then it drops down when you go to the upper halves. So most people range from, let's say, very inexperienced to about average, and then above average, it just drops very.
Yeah, getting some visualization out of it is interesting, I suppose, and actually looking at although data visualization is a whole art in of itself, like almost literally an art. Doing it well is actually surprisingly difficult.
But I mean, that's in many ways what, like, how you. That's what you'd call, like, useful data, I'd say, like, because you want to compare, like, how different brackets of player skill play a different ship. Because if you see that the ship is played very well, very often only by good players and not so much by bad players and so on, that gives you important information. And also you want to know, like, you want to evaluate how good a ship is. You have to evaluate over different skill levels and so on. So that's very good if they collect data like this. It's a bit concerning if they didn't do that in the past, though, if that's like their new achievement over the years.
Yeah, they do seem quite proud. I mean, that they've made a very prominent point out of, now we actually look at the individual player's performance when passing all the other data that we've collected around that player. It's like, you weren't doing that before? Okay.
Also,
at least they're showing that they now do it in a much more detailed way.
Yes, although there are still questions that I'd have. For example, like, account win rate is not necessarily recent win rate. So you, like, if you start the game, like when I started the game, it was pretty bad, right? And over time you get better. And so your account win rate might not actually be like your current skill level. And then there's different classes and different tiers and so on. So you need to compare like Cleveland, maybe not to your overall win rate, but more to like other tier cruises or something like that. So there is a lot more. Like there are still a lot of traps in.
The Z52 chart below that is kind of interesting though. Like that is an example of specific detail where they show the damage distribution by weapon type for each of these win rate brackets, and that clearly shows that like the higher percentage winners are relying less on their torpedoes and using their guns a lot more, whereas the lower percentage brackets are being, I guess, essentially more passive and relying more on just throwing torpedoes downrange.
Yeah, I guess it shows that, with the better the players get, the more they use all the armaments that they have available to them. And, for example, armor piercing, like people that figure out that they can use armor piercing goes up.
What would be interesting to know is what they like. This is an interesting chart, but then what decisions would they make based off this chart? I mean, this chart's just kind of in there on its own. Like, what would they do with this specific set of data, or is this just something they've done as an example of the kind of data they can collect and pass in different ways?
Yeah, I also like what I'm missing from this data is like average numbers, right? I mean, percentage-wise, I mean, this does tell us some interesting stuff. But for example, I would now like to know how big is the average torpedo damage of compared to like other people. And then when we go with the fires, I'd like to see like 9% of the damage is fires, even though they don't necessarily use high explosive more often. They do more fire damage. Is that because the people are more likely to mount fire flags? Is it because they use different skills, like maybe the fire skill? Is it because they just understand how damage cone works and they bait the damage cone and then set fires deliberately? It's like there is a lot of... Like, we now see the data and now you got to ask yourself, why is that? And, I feel like there is... Obviously, they might have the somewhere else, but it's like it comes down to how you interpret it and how you said like what conclusions do you draw from it. How does this help you balance then?
Yeah, the next set of examples they give is specific to subs. They're talking about how they were able to collect a variety and a high volume of data about the different metrics that they considered important about submarines. Again, we have a couple of charts. So time spent at different submerged level, and again, it's broken up by win rate brackets, and they've also got one for sonar ping hits, which I mean, again, it's like looking at this data and like what do you take? What useful stuff did they take from this?
Yeah,
like the higher bracket on the sonar ping one, for instance, actually has a lower percentage than the lowest bracket. Like, what conclusion did they draw from that? You'd think it would be the other way around, but does that just mean that lower percentage winners are lower win percentage players are just pinging way more often, or I don't know.
The way I understand the ping chart is, right, that of all the pings that have hit, how many were one hits, how many were two hits, and how many were neutralized. So basically, with the higher tier, you get more two hits and less one hits because they basically need less tries to hit two pings, right?
Oh, I suppose so. There's not that much difference between the numbers there is there? And the neutralized number is pretty much the same.
The neutralized is pretty much the same because you don't necessarily know. Like when damage cone is running, you just keep pinging, right? You don't have your lock set and to lock. Okay, this ship has 20-second damage cone. I now have to wait 20 seconds. So you just keep pinging. So I'd expect it to be relatively the same. But for the 2 hits I just said, it means people have increased accuracy the higher you go. So the higher you go, the less tries they need a double.
Yeah, that's just me not reading that graph very well. But it does then move into an admission that sometimes they get things wrong.
But also, when you come to like the submerged levels and blah, once again, the graphs are not that different, but I feel like it mostly shows that better players are less often at the bottom, right? Like they dive less often because probably they want to conserve their diving time for when it's needed, and because they want the vision, because they understand how important vision is. That's my interpretation, right? While, I don't know, less experienced players might just, enjoy the underwater scenery, or they just want the safety of not being seen.
Yeah. Sort of a substantial change. I mean, it's only 6% difference, but then you look at the operating depth and that's 8%. So yeah, people are just, I don't know, the last couple of players are just spending more time submerged unnecessarily, I suppose, is what we would take from that. But again, how does this influence their balancing decisions? That's the step that we're missing from how they've gathered this data.
I mean, true. That's now the question. It also, the thing is it because like bad or less experienced players are often in situations where they need to be submerged because they don't get the positioning right? Or is it just that they are submerged for no reason? Or is it that they just don't value spotting as much? Is it like, the thing is, it could be that basically they are submerged for no reason, or it could be that they just get themselves into bad situations more often, where diving is the only option. And that's something we can't find out with this chart, right? So they need more data, and that's vital to using that data in the right way. Of course, what's also would be interesting is like how effective are they with needles and such, and how much damage and like there's a lot of interesting data missing anyway.
Yeah, these are quite specific examples that they've given.
Yeah. I mean, they're also, I guess, not too controversial, right? If they throw out a chart about how much damage a submarine take, that might have people all up in arms. Just show that people with more skill hit their pings more often. It's, you're like, yeah, I'm not surprised. Then as you pointed out, they said that they made mistakes.
Yes, that's I kind of got ahead of myself a bit. But the fact that they're using the Italian battleship branch as their example is interesting, because that's one where I remember at the time, a lot of the CCs were saying these are undercooked. They're kind of frustrating to play with the main batteries. They don't feel like they're doing enough damage at the tiers that they're doing. And it took multiple rounds of being buffed where they were at the point of actually, I guess, now that they're happy with how they're performing, more or less. But that's definitely a case where the CCs were saying fairly unified. They were saying this is there's something wrong here, and Wargaming was just like, yeah, it's fine. So yeah, there are plenty of examples of times when they have ignored both their kind of expert feedback and their wider community feedback on things, and then been forced to fix things later. So yeah, that's definitely a prime example, the Italian battleships. Which, it's like the whole concept was a bit
it's
suspect, really. Let's make battleships with really horrible accuracy. Okay. Not even Soviet battleships where you get closer and it's better accuracy. Just no terrible accuracy across all ranges. Have fun.
I mean, the thing that bothered me about the Italian design is that if you do that, then you need to like have a real advantage when you get close, you need to either have like exceptional armor and good secondaries, or other capabilities that make up for it. Because it's fine for a battleship to be bad at range. If it, you then have to design it into a tanky brawler kind of thing. But they refuse to do that because, obviously your accuracy improves when you get closer, like all other ships, but not in a very specifically fast way, not in an amazing way. And you have so small guns that you don't have the overmatch that if you brawl, you can't even go through like a Des Moines nose or something. So it's like they didn't have the traits that you'd expect from a brawling close quarters battleship, but they were also bad at range. And then they had Zap on top that most of the time is just useless.
And the fact that you only got the unique thing of the line was the smoke, but you only get that from tier 8 up. So that's hardly that didn't really make up for the rest of it.
Yeah, also it's a very niche case thing, and it would pair in a way well with a brawler as a gap closer or as an emergency disengage. Emergency disengage is the only thing that the smoke is usually useful for. Like, if you bit off too much, you just silence your guns and you smoke and you try to get out of there while you can. But yeah, they are, as you said earlier, basically half-cooked, right? There wasn't a real idea of how they should perform, what they should feel on the battlefield, how the playstyle should work. It was just some ideas slapped together.
Well, they do themselves in this, the conclusion of this particular section that numbers are not the whole truth, and again, trying to convince people, trying to propagandize a bit, and
basically parrot what people have telling them over the years. They are like, oh, what was people's main feedback? Numbers are not the whole truth. Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one, right?
Hopefully, this is genuinely, a statement that they are changing how they do things, that they are now more seriously taking that on board, and we won't get another situation like with the Italian battleships, or I can't even think what other lines we've had like that, but there probably have been some in the past. And or even specific examples like Habarovsk, I guess.
Yeah. The sad part is that this article isn't they said that with the Italians, we made a mistake, but they don't say okay, we have approached balancing a bit wrong in the past 3 years and we now value your input more. They basically tell them oh yeah, feedback, very valuable, very important in our balancing. Definitely. We listen. The next is how decisions are made. And apart from dry numbers of this, we also take guidance from feedback from your players and use our own judgments. So basically, it's statistics plus player feedback plus developer experience. But it just, never quite felt that way.
I suppose on the one hand, it's not how easy is it going to be to do that, and to sort of have that be a kind of what am I trying to say, a publicly for people to have the impression that that's something that they really take seriously. There are ways they could do it, but it wouldn't necessarily be that easy, because you're always going to piss somebody off, if I can put it that way. But at the moment, it does it's still things are getting maybe a little better in terms of communication generally, but it does still feel like there's that kind of black box of everything goes into, and then at the end of the day, well, it's kind of wargaming's wishes and decisions that kind of can override even quite substantial feedback on a particular matter, for example. But I was probably really awkwardly put. Like, I kind of know what I mean.
Yeah.
I
I think I know what you mean. That one of the problems is that obviously the community feedback, it's not like everybody provides the same feedback, right? There are people who look at this and like, this ship is overpowered, and the other is, no, this ship is underpowered. And the other person is like, I don't care about this ship. And it's like, you get a lot of different feedback and a lot of contradictory feedback. But obviously, when we were contributors, we saw firsthand that our feedback was often met with like, you just don't know, right? We know better than you without explanation. So the thing is that
indifference, at worst, occasionally even derision.
Yes, and it's like they can't claim that they really took feedback into account for the last years, or at least back to the point where we're contributors, because we knew they basically told us in our faces that they didn't care about feedback. So, I mean, this is not how decisions were made. If decisions are now made taking this feedback into account, that's great. If we actually achieve that, they change that. I'm skeptic, but if that's actually what they do now, that would
be great. This is actually all genuine and not just for show. Be fantastic.
And then they have the myth developers don't play the game. It actually includes I think screenshots of members of their staff.
Yeah, this all came out of that Russian guy that got booted, and I kind of like that. That's sort of dogged them a bit since then. And honestly, I think we've gone over this in previous podcasts, but yeah, I'm kind of inclined to side with Wargaming on that one. That felt like a very iffy conclusion based on, not a lot of data.
Yeah. The thing is that the reason why this myth, in a sense, persists is because it just feels that way. Because the sad part is like a lot of decisions that they make, you feel like, if they've played this game, like even like one battle or so and something, then why would you do this? It's like when you play a convoy game and you're like, look, if I flip the start and the end point in this map, it's much more balanced. I played this match once and I already know this, right? And after I've played it 20 times, I still know this. And it's so bloody obvious. And it's like, and you look at this and how could this have been played by a developer? And he was like, yeah, this is fine. When literally this is all you needed to do to make it more balanced. Maybe not perfectly balanced, but a lot better. And it's so simple things that you feel like if you played this one game, you would have noticed. So it doesn't feel like they played a game because of a lot of the decisions that they make. It's entirely possible that the department is just constantly overwritten and they're like, oh yeah, we should make this decision. They're like, no, it's already fine.
Yeah, I mean, as we've learned from various things, it's quite it seems like it's quite a top-heavy management structure at Leicester.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's the voices at the top that kind of can override even quite sensible suggestions and feedback.
And it's. Now, this is also why it gets like really hilarious, right? For example, when adding anti-submarine weapons to ships in the game, we initially decided to give them only to some of the branches so that this would become new national gameplay features. And yeah, on paper, players were not happy about this idea. However, even ideas that players not initially still need to be tested. And then basically they reversed that decision on player feedback. But it's like, this is where you really ask themselves, how can you play this game and think like, oh yeah, I feel like most ships should not be able to hurt submarines. That's like a genius idea. Like what if like from like with a 12 versus 12 and only 4 ships in this game can actually hurt the submarine? Genius move, right? It's like you don't make me believe that you play your game if if you think like, yeah, that needs testing.
It feels like one of those, like that specific thing, it feels like one of those things where it was just an utter lack of perspective on something that they're sort of on the inside of, and that they only have that perspective of being on the inside of, and having that kind of I guess, developer mindset of, this is a feature, how can we, implement this feature, and et cetera, as opposed to how players are going to experience said feature. And like from the player point of view, it seems like such a no-brainer of making subs immune to 2/3 of the enemy team unless they're on the surface. And that I think it specifically went into that in the video. Like that was the initial concept they had. That subs are going to have to be on the surface sometimes, so people will shoot at them then, and that's fine. That's how it'll work. But yeah, it didn't.
Yeah, but and that's one of the things that you find out but that's something that you should find out in internal testing, right? And that is where you say, like, well, if the developers took that idea into like their own battles, right, and played internally with their idea, they should have realized very quickly that, oh, this is a terrible idea, right? I can understand that somebody on the whiteboard has the idea, although even that is already questionable, but maybe somebody who isn't playing that much, or not playing at all. Anyway, somebody on the whiteboard feels like, hey, this could be a feature. And then you have people actually play it and try, and they're like, no. But Wargaming had to put it to the people, right? Even though they objected. And then they only accepted it was a bad idea. So once again, this is where we come back to that myth, right? It's because such simple things that you find out by playing the game and they don't find it out themselves.
And it does also feel like another example of one of those times when we had to get quite a large, overwhelmingly negative amount of community outcry against a thing for Wargaming to go, okay, we'll change that.
And then they still didn't give it to everyone, right? I mean, the
Dutch
it
still took several stages to get to the point where everyone has it except the Dutch cruisers.
And Okhotnik. It's like, and this is just one of those silly things where even in the end, they didn't completely cave in. They were like, no, the Dutch won't get it. I was right. Not everyone needs anti-submarine warfare. I told you. Also, it feels like.
Another thing that they particularly gave an example of here was Thunderer. And again, they were like, oops.
Yeah,
we made a mistake after people for a long time, even in testing, people going, yeah, this is a problem. And then taking quite a long time to A, acknowledge that there was a problem, and B, then do anything about the problem.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that they're trying to defend themselves, which it's hard to find the what causes the pains, right? And it was on the forefront of the miners working on solving on them. Look, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that this Thunderer is doing too much damage in long range and sets too many people on fire, and that you want to address it, right? It doesn't take... Well, how long has the Thunderer actually been? Long time.
For years now?
Yeah, it took them years to figure it. You can't tell me that you need to collect years of data to figure out that the Thunderer spamming long-range HE is not an enjoyable experience and that people are unhappy about that. Because they literally told them that. And it's one of those things where, like, there's a problem, the people told you what the problem is, and they're like, yeah, I don't know, what about we get the data for 3 years and we'll come back to you on that. And it's one of those difficult things. How could we, how too much high explosive on long range, how could that be addressed? I don't know. A nerf and anti-air mount? Oh no, wait, that's Kremlin. It's like, once again, it's like obvious problems with obvious solutions, and they can't, like, I'm not even sure what to say about it, but it's an obvious problem with an obvious solution, right? You can't get out of this by saying we needed to collect data for 3 years to figure that out.
Yeah, there's definitely some weasel words in this example that they give, like if I remember, just read it out and we can, So a good example of a long but successful search for a solution to a balancing problem is the story of the battleship HMS Thunderer. Her playstyle, showering enemies with high explosive shells from long range, annoyed many players. Yeah, no shit. based on past experience with other ships, we decided that the problem lay in her excessive popularity, which, like, why? Why yeah, okay, if it's, that, then you change some characteristics. But instead, they went with the solution of, we're going to remove it from sale. Which I don't. It's one of those times where it just feels like what you were saying of that feeling almost of they don't play their own game, surely. But I guess they had that developer mindset, that producer mindset about it, rather than the player mindset about it. So and then. Unfortunately, the diminishing popularity of the ship did not solve the problem. Of course it didn't. It still had the same characteristics. It's not rocket science.
It almost feels like a sort of Monty Python sketch. It's like they're like, this is the problem, so we've decided to ignore the problem and do something else. It didn't solve the problem.
So, they then get on to say that they eventually decided they were going to reduce the firing range, so the people that are playing at medium range and using a mix of AP and HE are not really affected, but the people that were just spamming HE at long range are then forced to get closer. So, that is a prime example, and it doesn't address it at all of everybody just face palming about the obvious problem. And, well, to be fair, there were a couple of solutions they could have gone, but some very obvious solutions on it. It's taken a really long time after them having first made a completely weird decision that didn't actually address the problem. So I don't know what they were hoping to highlight with this example, other than sometimes they do things in a really weird, backwards feeling way.
I mean, it feels like they're trying to show. It once again feels like they don't really want to admit that they're wrong. They feel like,
hey, look, we're self-aware. We acknowledge it's a problem, but we're not going to,
It feels like they're trying to sell this as a success story. They feel like, look at this. We know how to do things. You just weren't aware of it. Let me explain to you how expertly we've managed Thunder.
Yeah.
Because it had a problem. We identified the problem. We decided to ignore it. Then we gathered data for 3 years, and then we decided to implement a fix. Aren't we great? Don't you understand now how great we are at this balancing thing?
So that, if this is propaganda, that almost feels like an own goal.
Sometimes players create problems that ain't there in advance. Oh, that's obviously true. Jedi's touched on earlier with like the RPF thing, right? It's sometimes things get overhyped or blown out of proportion because there's maybe one Twitch clip or something or so where something looks overpowered, and then all people get up in arms about something that's not really a big deal. That's definitely true. And sometimes as a company, you have to filter that out.
Even like this is something where it's kind of on us as content creators, and maybe not us specifically, because I don't think either of us are the kind of OMG the drama type content creators, but some people are, and that kind of thing, it gets views, and so it's quite easy. And this has happened to, I'm sure, numerous people over numerous game communities and other fields of anything, where people have maybe started off doing one way and then just decided, oh, well, drama videos get more views, we'll just do all the drama videos. But there's not always drama, so sometimes you have to look, things to create drama about. And
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily just call it drama. It's just that when you call a ship like, oh my god, this is crazy, this is so good, this is so strong, or oh my god, this is so weak, this is like, if you go to the extremes, it attracts more people. If you make a video, this ship is so mediocre, people are like, eh. But people want to see something that's really strong or weak.
If you try and have a more nuanced position, like, that's almost... I don't know how you get around that, really, because you can either have the nuanced position or you can have that kind of, like, people seem to more want the kind of, is it good or is it bad? and there's not really any kind of in-between thing. They just kind of want to know if it's one extreme or the other. So sometimes it isn't, but
I mean,
I don't know. That seems to be
it
what
also
gets used.
it's on what the views on the one end. Also, I think it depends on what you evaluate the ship for, right? If you, for example, look at it from a competitive thing, either it's like in competitive, you don't care if a ship is close enough, you only want the best, right? So either it's the best or it's not. So it's almost a 1-0 situation. Like there are only two outcomes. Either it's good and you'd take that in the competitive, or it's just not up for competitive, right? And this position is then obviously a bit more dramatized because it might still be perfectly fine for random battles, right? But if you look at something for more competitive, it's like, okay, there is a ship that does the same thing better. Why would I play it? Maybe I like the looks better, or some handling is better, or that there might be some, personally preferences why you'd like another ship, even if it's not the top dog, right? But yeah. It's also that overpowered draws. Like a lot of people just want to know what is the strongest ship, right? And they want to play that.
They do end this by sort of making the point that game balance is not set in stone, and things are changing over time, and it's kind of an obvious point to make, I suppose. But
it's once again hilarious because they bring up the Sao. I mean, they only buffed the Sao because people have nagging them for years, and it's like that's something they should realize, right? Game balance is not set in stone. That's the problem. They seem to think that, not we seem to think, right? Because the community is like, why can't you buff those old ships? And we're like, no.
And this is almost, it's going back to what they were supposedly saying earlier about, well, player feedback is a thing that we take into consideration. And doesn't feel like it has so much in the past, though. Like if there were cases, long-running cases like the Zao, where clearly people, enough people for it to have garnered this reputation as being kind of left in the dust, that it shouldn't take them so long to address this, but it really does. So yeah,
I mean, especially if the stats back it happens.
I do like this last bit, though. They're sticking to their strategy of making only small changes. I've said in the past, I feel this is largely a positive thing. Even though sometimes it can feel a bit silly. 2,000 hit points for the Zao or whatever it was.
I mean, the thing about small changes is that you need to apply them regularly, right? What you then, what I would like them to see is basically that they sort of focus on one line, almost like one line at a time. They go like, okay, this month we're gonna look at, I don't know, Japanese cruises, and we go through all of the cruises and we look at all the changes that could possibly be needed then, and then we adjust them, right? And it's like maybe focus 1 month at the line and try to bring up the old lines back. And you need also you need a lot more frequent changes and not just a couple of random ships at some point where the community cries loudest. Because once again, they claim the right things, like they say, balance is not set in stone. Basically, you need to constantly monitor and adjust things, but that's exactly what they haven't been doing over the year.
Yeah, if we had some more like regular, if we had actual proof, I guess, I don't know if that's quite the right word, but if they were actually showing that they're doing this and having, like, well, Tanks does this every time there's a major patch, you end up with a whole list of sometimes minor tweaks and changes. And World of Warships, it's never really been like that, and we're at that stage now where we have quite a lot of ships, so actually it kind of feels like we should be getting more of these maintenance buffs and nerfs. So this is definitely an example where it feels like they're talking the talk, but they don't really walk the walk, which is probably the saying I was looking for in the beginning. But the need to that they feel the need to give the examples of the Zao and the Buffalo of these kind of, I guess you could call them maintenance changes. Well, these shouldn't be something notable. These should be just a regular kind of part of each patch, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree, right? This is something that constantly needs to happen, where like each patch you take a look at some of the ships and then make adjustments, right? So you constantly keep them up to date. And that's why there is so big backlog of ships that might need to change because they haven't done that over the past 6 years.
There are certainly plenty of examples of ships that probably could do with even relatively minor tweaks to keep them relevant and fun. Because, they have made some fairly, like even in just the last couple of years, subs alone is a fairly major change. But aside from the depth charges, we've not really had any adjustments to other ships to try and like take account of that. And that's just one example. I'm sure there's plenty of other things where you could point at and say, maybe this change over here should have resulted in some changes over here for these ships, but it never occurred. And so you end up with situations like the Zhao and the Buffalo, where it just becomes really dragged out and almost a meme.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next bit is talking about how they develop new ships, new branches of ships, based on existing data. And they particularly gave the example of Shima's popularity influencing the creation of the European destroyers, which are very torpedo focused.
I mean, but I guess it kind of sounds obvious that if people like to play certain types of ships or so, then you would use that as inspiration for something else. Although I feel like, Shima's popularity showed that players are interested in purely torpedo and gameplay. A good Shima player is not purely about torpedoes, although a lot of the bad ones are. But the Shima offers a lot more than that. And I feel like this is one of the, obviously might be interpreting too much in this one sentence, but if you understand the Shimakaze, you understand that a lot of it is about the good concealment, the camp contesting, and the guns are not worthless either. It's like a Shima is a package of things, and the torpedoes are just one thing. And what I think attracts most people is that it's a lot of torpedoes that hit very hard. So that's why they like it, because they can easily death strike things, right?
Yeah, so I suppose it's kind of interesting, the example they give there, the torpedo focused line, except the experience of then using those torpedoes is actually quite different. So, but it's interesting to see that like put down in cold hard pixels, as it were. That they don't just sort of throw ideas of gimmicks at a wall and go, right, what can we, what national tree can we pin these gimmicks to? But they actually then sometimes take a lead from player data when it comes to designing new branches. So it like they're pulling from different sources and kind of intermixing these sources of ideas. And I don't know, it's just it's not anything, I suppose, groundbreaking to read as a player, but it's interesting to peek behind the curtain a little bit, which is kind of what they're doing here, really.
Generally, it's a good idea to look at what do people enjoy and then give them more of that, right? So the basic concept is a good one. See more. Question, of course, is, are they properly identifying what draws people to something? And then are able to recreate that experience in a sense that's sort of the same but slightly different. But it's obviously a right approach. You look at what people like and you try to give them more of that. Coincidentally, they currently have found out people don't like subs, so they're trying to give us more of that.
They do. There is the statement here which I kind of strongly disagree with as the factual accuracy of it. For the same reason, we do not make ships that are too strong, except, yeah, sometimes you do. Sometimes you do.
Wouldn't it be nice if that were true?
Yeah.
And then,
I mean, the part of this also, what I was talking about, like the gimmicks as they put it in this article, that that is, and anybody that's played this game for any length of time or followed the game for any length of time would be able to tell you that the national flavor is kind of a key element of, or branch flavor is a key element of how they design things in World Warships, and that very directly carries over from World of Tanks in terms of that design philosophy. So that's definitely not news to anybody, I don't think.
I mean, I've personally never had that big of a, like, the thing is, and I have to agree with Wargaming, that somehow you need to make ships different, right? And it's not like if you basically have the same, like, it's just adding a gun more or less and changing the reload a little bit, ships might still play entirely like the same. If you want to make, like, keeping something balanced but different is very hard, right? Because how are you tweaking the stats to give you a different experience but keeping it balanced? The easiest way is, if you want to make something new, is to add a new feature, like, a smoke screen that moves with you, or a Dutch airstrike or so, because it actually changes how you play the ship. And the thing is, if you just make like a regular ship, then people will be like, this is boring, why would I play that, right? I have already 5 like those. So people will complain with or without gimmicks. So I'd agree that gimmicks are sometimes fine, but it's coming up with new things. With the main issue is obviously how interesting are they, and how strong are they, and how balanced are they, and how fun are they to use or use against. It's more like the gimmick design itself that I'd say might be sometimes questionable. The idea that you design a ship line around something, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's one where it's hard to make any blanket statements, because sometimes the gimmicks work quite well, and other times they're kind of questionable or they feel too niche. But overall, I'd say they've I'll give Wargaming this thing. They've done quite a good job of, with some exceptions. So this is not a universal thing, but you look at any given branch and they tend to have relatively consistent gameplay. But like I said, there are definitely examples where that's not true, where you have an odd ship or two that just stick out like a sore thumb in terms of their playstyle compared to the rest of the ships of the line.
True. It's one of the things that, like, I mean, I've played World of Tanks in a long time, but back when I played it, it was like, I mean, every line basically started out like light tanks, and then sometimes you had a scout tank mixed in that had like the special scout matchmaking, and maybe you just wanted to go to medium tanks or even a heavy tank, and suddenly you had to play through the scout tank in the scout matchmaking that nobody explained to you, and you were confused, and you are fail divisioned with your friends because they were the same tier as you, which doesn't work because you've scout matchmaking.
Yeah,
and it was like a mess.
For a long time, there was no indication in the game that it was different before they regularized all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was definitely a failure of giving players information that was necessary. What else have we got in this?
With the myth that developers give preference to a particular nation.
No, I think this is them trying to address that very, very old notion of Russian bias. Which, to me, I mean, there are some specific Russian ships that are really strong, but there are specific other ships of other nations that are really strong as well. So it's one of these almost self-fulfilling. Well, I don't think Wargaming's ever going to get away from that, just because they're a Russian company.
I mean, Yes, the wargaming have like Thunder or Belfast, so there are plenty of ships that are overpowered that are not Russian. But I have to say this: the thing is, I think what gets people in this case is that the Russian Navy just wasn't that great during World War II, right? And despite that, they often seem to have like the most advanced things in the game, like the 12-kilometer Russian radar or so on. Like basically, they've taken a sort of weaker navy and made it exceptional, and that obviously creates like already the feeling of like, wait a moment, why are these Russian ships suddenly on the top, right? That they have the past from World of Tanks, which unfairly carried over at the start, I guess. And then, of course, I think they had a few early issues like Gremyachny.
Yeah.
Which was sort of balanced at the start, but it was balanced for a different game, right? After 3 Minakaze nerfs, the Minakaze was suddenly no longer as strong as a Gremyachny. So it's like then they had like early on, I think, the Imperator Nikolai. So they made a few Russian OPs early on that didn't help them, but generally speaking, it was never that. But I also have to say Russian ships have been very consistently strong. The Russian destroyers, they have been out power creeped, but when they were released, they were pretty decent. They nerfed Khabarovsk, I think, a few times.
Yeah, Khabar, like, early in its life was an absolute demon, really. I mean, these days we have the French destroyers and we have other things that can run around and pew pew in the open and have decent speed. But back then there was really nothing else like it. And you would have, like, it was one of the more annoying, if not the most annoying high-tier ships to face off against. Because, especially if you were in something relatively inaccurate like a battleship or even some of the cruisers, you just had no hope of actually hitting it, and it'd be running around and setting fires on you constantly. Yep. And it's with the various changes they've had now, it's just absolutely, it's almost a different ship in terms of how it fits in with the game these days, and it's gotten to the point where rather than try and balance it further, they've just kind of gone, no, we're going to replace it.
And we'll see how that works. But yeah, I'd say the Russian destroyers, they were pretty strong when they were released, even though they are no longer today. The Russian cruisers, back in the day, right, the range was, they were pretty strong as well. Like, I remember like when the Germans also came out, the Russian cruisers, like the long range is not something that the Japanese or the US had. So that was a very special feature that made cruiser play a lot easier because you could keep more distance to battleships and so on. I feel like they might not have been now necessarily powered by release. In a while, I can't quite remember. But they were pretty solid too, right? They weren't in any way on the weaker end. Then they had obviously and I mean, by now they have replaced some of the cruisers, like they've replaced Moskva with the Petro, which is obviously too strong. Then we had the whole Stalingrad thing for a long time. Then we have, was it this Kutuzov or so at tier 8 that has been removed with its smoke fire thingy. Then we have the battleships that came out too strong. And then their reaction to it was like to nerf anti-air. It's also like those reactions, right? They release something that's overperforming and instead of like, yeah, okay, you're right, we need to balance it. They're like, well, how about we change the anti-air now? And Petro,
how about we balance the thing that has absolutely almost no bearing on how well it performs? Okay.
Moskva is weak. Well, Moskva is weak compared to Stalingrad and Petro. But yeah, like as I've said, like the Russian cruisers were pretty solid when they came out, right? They've just introduced even better Russian cruisers since then. The battleships were very strong. The carriers now are very strong. So basically, you have to say that all the Russian lines that they release are just top tier solid, right? And only the destroyers have been out power creeped and they're getting like the Khabarovsk changed. So they call it a myth, but unfortunately the facts are, and yeah, as also Manuel Waters pointed out, when you see King of the Seas, also like since the Moskva has been replaced, when you see like that basically a a team has like almost only Russian ships in it, you go like, really?
I think overall, though, that is definitely firmly in the meme territory of Russian bias. I mean, it's kind of almost amusing to me the fact that they thought this was something they had to address.
I mean, the problem is they aren't helping themselves with the way they release new ships, because when they release a new Russian ship, it tends to be very strong, even if it's not necessarily overpowered. It's like, it's not like an Italian battleship line where they don't seem to care about this. It's like when it's Russian, it just consistently performs.
I mean, it isn't quite what they're saying, but maybe for their home audience, if you like, they take a little bit more time and care when it comes to balancing ships before they come out, perhaps? Maybe it could be put that way.
I feel like, when I said balancing is sort of exists in a bracket, I feel like when they design something Russian, they try to balance it on the upper part of the bracket, and when they develop something else, they don't care where in the bracket it's at.
So the next part is talking about testing and the process of testing and gathering feedback for test ships.
Yeah, so basically they first let loose like the super testers and community contributors. And I think super testers are even first for them. Of course, they have the internal testing, as they said earlier, and then they give out service and direct one in ways. Keep the current concept and begin balancing the ship to bring it to try the efficiency, or completely abandon the concept and do something else. That's an interesting one. What's the last time that I've actually completely abandoned a concept, no matter the feedback? Feels like they stopped doing that like 3 years ago. Because we definitely, as contributors, we saw a lot of feedback of this idea isn't quite working. You should change it, or you should try it with a different one. And they were like, no, this is fine. Basically all the time.
I think the only specific example I can think of was the what was it called at the time? The Pobeda, which kind of then morphed to become the Slava.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if they didn't completely drop it, but they shelved it for a really long time before anything similar saw the light of day. And like that, I think what we have now is probably quite toned down to the testing that we had at first, where it just felt laser accurate at range, and it was squashy enough that that was the only way to play it. You couldn't really get up close because you would just die instantly. So you were forced into that very long range snipey play style. And Wargaming had the idea that because some people like to play like that, then we'll cater to that, even though it isn't necessarily a healthy thing for the game. And it certainly wasn't fun to play against. So
I mean, it's still sort of that, just a bit tuned down.
Toned down, yeah. So like I said, the concept never truly went away. But I can't think of any other. Like there probably is one or two other specific examples. So I'm trying to think.
Concepts that are changed, but those were not recently, were like the German destroyers, who were all back in the day invisible firing, that they changed very shortly before release.
Yeah, that came out just before they made that global change, and that sort of quite dramatically affected how one played them.
I mean, they throw away the concept, but they've screwed up there because they didn't test the new concept properly, but they just last minute That was a last minute where they changed the concept.
Hmm.
The British cruisers is where they changed the concept rather early, where they removed the high explosive, where they found like smoke spamming high explosive line is a bad idea for the game. Something that you can't even imagine that today's wargaming even say the words, but back in the day they said a smoke spamming high explosive line is not a good concept, so they actually threw away the concept.
I think it made everyone particularly aghast when Smolensk came along for that very reason, because they had specifically removed the high explosive from the British cruisers, and they had removed from sale Belfast for that exact reason. And then they came along and went, well, it's fine. It's not that big a deal, really. Here's the Smolensk. And yeah, I mean, you don't like. It's time. It's. I think. Like, you still see them quite often, but it felt really bad for a while. You'd have Smolensk or two Smolensks in high tier games pretty reliably, and it was just not fun at all. And it really did feel like they just kind of completely ignored all of their earlier decision making on that particular thing in that instance. Yeah, to
me it feels like that back in the day, basically, they actually did, like, this is something that they used to do. For me, it feels like, right, back in the day, they evaluated their concepts and they were willing to throw it out if it didn't fit in the game. It received a lot of feedback. Back in the day, because it feels like when in the early days of contributor days, it feels like they actually valued feedback and listened, right? And they were willing to change concepts. Also, something that comes in mind is Massachusetts. Massachusetts started out as a clone of like in Alabama. People were like, this is boring, do something else. Then they made something weird that absolutely didn't work. People were like, this makes no sense.
There was a rolling ship with like a really weak citadel or something like that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I think like a damage con that ran a little bit longer and then had a massive like cooldown where you couldn't like damage con anything and were just fodder for floods and stuff. And yeah, they had a few things that made no sense. And in the end, I made it into Brawler, right? But they abandoned at least two concepts, basically, during Massachusetts development based on feedback. So it feels like back in the day, they actually did this, right? They had a concept, they tested it, they collected feedback, and if it didn't work, they were willing to throw it. But in recent years, they have a concept. People tell them it's a bad idea. They tested it's a bad idea. They're like, we go with it.
Yeah, and it sort of feels like it is quite relevant at the moment with subs, where despite them having said, the fallback is if it doesn't work, then we'll just remove them. But it doesn't at any point feel like that's been a serious option.
Yeah,
and we're going to get them no matter what.
It's once again, as you said, like this whole article reads like in many ways how we don't do it, but how balancing should have been done.
Yeah, this is how some wargaming in an alternate universe does things.
Like they make the appropriate noises, but their actions just doesn't really comply with any of what they write. Like that's why I found this start so amusing, because basically in the very first article, paragraph, they describe balancing as something that they explicitly don't do. Oh well. I mean, they go on about if the concept doesn't fit, then they tweak it to make the concept, or change the concept and so on.
Like you said, that doesn't seem like it happens very often at all. Although an example would be wasn't the initial idea of the Palo Emilio quite different from the CC Summit Because that was kind of like, was that the Paolo Emilio or was that something else?
I mean, I wasn't at the summit, so.
No, I mean, I just generally, because I'm pretty sure the Paolo Emilio was like they asked the CCs that were present to come up with, an idea for a ship, but it was a kind of like an exercise, and then they took it away and said they were going to implement it in some form, and the some form that it got implemented in was quite different in the end, to the point where it didn't really have much in common with that initial idea at all. So yeah, there wasn't really much of a through thread from the idea that the CCs will put something in the game. Well, not
really. I'm not sure. It's like I don't remember, but if they changed the concept back then, it would also have been a while ago. I mean, back in the day, like as I said, it feels like in the early days, Warships was willing to try concepts and change them if needed. It's just that in the recent years where they were like, we just throw everything out. Why not?
Partly it might be just the stage that the game is at and that the studio themselves are at, where they're more thinking about, in terms of like in the earlier days, it was how do we grow the audience? How do we grow the player base? How do we add more stuff but keep it fun for people? And then these days it's more, well, we've invested this much in developing X, and we're not just going to drop it, so let's plow on.
I mean, I also feel like they've in many ways developed themselves into corners, right? Because they just kept introducing too many currencies, like from free experience, doubloons, coal, steel, research points. You need ships. Well, I mean, the problem is you need to fill all of those with ships, right? If you only have silver and doubloon ships, you need to design two kinds of ships. If you have 5 currencies, you need to design only 5 ships, right? To recently stock all of those things. And the faster people collect like coal and so on, the more often you need to throw out a coal ship to like deplete the coal stocks, right? In a sense. So it's the way they've developed the game. They forced themselves into creating more and more ships, and that just means they don't take as much care with the individual ships. They can't really spend the time and effort to make a proper ship because they're like, oh damn it, we need a new coal ship. This thing floats. Okay.
I mean, we've had indications also that the production pipeline is kind of fairly divorced from that. So they're developing ships for however long it takes, a year, 2 years, whatever, including all the the intensive stuff like modeling and whatever. And it's only relatively late in the process that they know that, well, this is going to be a coal ship, this is going to be a free XP ship or whatever.
Yeah, true, but like they need a lot of ships to throw out, right? So basically they have this huge ship factory in a sense that just constantly needs to push out ships. Basically they say like, I don't know, we need like five new premiums in a month or so on. And then they look at the data and like, this is not coal, this is no things, but they've moved from handcrafting ships into more of a industrial ship factory where it's just, the quality doesn't matter this much. If it looks like a ship and it floats at least for 5 minutes, then we can call it a ship. And the only thing that matters is that we produce enough per month, right?
One wonders a bit how potentially different things could be if there was a kind of almost a deliberately slower pace and maybe, as you say, fewer currencies to try and fill up with ships, if we would maybe have a more developed or more balanced feeling game overall. So it's like the focus, maybe even more so than the early game, like it sometimes feels like there's almost too much coming out at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely lose track of all the stuff that gets released. And most of them is just, it feels like mediocre filler content and you see once and forget. And like when you look at the actual games, there are so many ships that you basically see for a week and then they disappear. Because people tried them out and they were like, yeah.
Some of that's definitely tied into. We've definitely talked about this previously, but with the pre-release missions and all that, and then people getting them early, and and then just going back to the ships that they actually enjoy playing, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a bit weird because you're right now. The German event is sort of over in that sense, but it's like you want to unlock the Germans. You don't need to play the Germans to unlock the higher tiers. So you basically play the ship that, like, you had these personal missions, right? And you wanted to play maybe a Japanese destroyer, where there was the easy experience mission, and then a Japanese battleship, and then a Japanese cruise, and then you wanted to play a US destroyer and a US cruise and a US battleship, and to farm the tokens most efficiently. So once again, then you unlock the German ships by not playing the German ships. So you don't really grind through the line. You just play other ships to unlock them, and then you have them in your port, and then you're less motivated to play the tier 5 or tier 6 or tier 7. You already have the tier 8 or something.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely at that point you're sort of more stuck in a loop of being a content mill than actually, adding stuff that adds good gameplay. Potentially, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like, they had like the sort of the free content. They released a new ship line, and also it took a lot longer to grind back then, right? So you had a new ship line, and maybe you spent a month or two or whatever. Like if you're a casual player, you could spend half a year or so grinding a new ship line, right? So they didn't need to release ship lines necessarily all that often anyway, because a ship line was a huge amount of new content for a lot of people to go through. And then they just had the premiums where they made money, and then they sold maybe and according a premium to the new ship line, or every few months they had a new premium coming out that people might be interested in buying, and people had time to focus on that and maybe read reviews on that, and people knew about the ship because there was only one new premium coming out and so on. And this has all sort of gone away, where there isn't any like free grinding anymore, or barely any, because you play things and you do missions and you unlock stuff that you then don't need to play. It's like they develop themselves out of their own content. So what they do is they try to throw as much stuff out as possible, constantly have a new pre-release event, constantly have a new premium, constantly just throw things out to keep up with the bad decisions.
Yeah, I don't really see how they could get themselves out of that now. They're in that kind of that loop, as you put it, that they've painted themselves into this corner.
I mean, they just need to change how they do pre-release stuff. I mean, the currencies are a bit of an issue, because it's also like the way they design currencies is you can farm them sort of simultaneously at a point. Like everything you do sort of gives you coal in a sense. And steel is only ranked, right? But if you do ranked, you'll also get the coal, and you'll also get the free experience in a sense. So you kind of farm 3 currencies at once. So they need to stock 3 sort of markets that the players farm simultaneously, so they don't even have to focus on one currency.
We're almost at the end of this. So the last section is the rock, paper, scissors principle, which again very much a carryover from the design philosophy of World of Tanks originally. I mean, it's arguable whether that actually applies to World of Tanks anymore, or even has vaguely so for a long time, but that was kind of their initial thought of, X would counter Y, and Y would counter Z, and Z would counter X kind of thing.
I mean, the thing is that I feel like they are thinking in wrong terms there, because first of all, they've developed the game too broad for that to work, because not every destroyer is basically fulfilling the same role, and not every cruiser is the same role, so you can't have it like, I don't know, the destroyer counters battleship, battleship counters cruiser, cruiser counters destroyer in that sense, right? You can't have an easy circular thing, because the different ships in every class perform very differently and fulfill different roles. And also, I feel like they need to look more at it from a role perspective of this ship can be a tank. This ship can be like a support, like cap contest or spotting. This is like a radar support. This ship focuses solely on damage. Because that's something that actually is much more important in the game, right? By accident or by design, they've created certain roles that the team needs to be successful. And that's really what they should focus on.
Yeah. I don't know how you do that, though, exactly. I mean, like, change up how matchmaking treats certain ships. So instead of just, like, cruiser, destroyer, battleship, it's more kind of like X number of, it matches up brawling battleships versus radar cruisers versus, unstealthy destroyers kind of thing, where it's sort of matching role to role and not just type to type kind of thing.
I mean, that would make the matchmaking in a way better, but it's not just that. I feel it's from a design philosophy, right? And it's the problem that they run into currently with the submarines. Wargaming thinks of this like, who should counter submarines and who should submarines counter? They don't think of it like, what's the place in the game, right? Wargaming doesn't look at the game and be like, okay, submarines should be doing that job. They should be played this way. They only look at it from, like, I mean, the game is more of just, in a sense, one-on-one fights. The game it's even though there is very little teamwork in it, there is actually a lot of roles and teamwork and a lot of, sort of complexity in how the game plays. And they ignore all that. And they just look at a very simple principle of who beats what. And considering that battleships are the best to counter submarines, they're probably not even very good at that.
Yeah. It's ended up in a bit of a weird place where like subs in this game are kind of a parody of real life subs anyway, and the fact that you've got these subs zipping around the place and the best counter to those subs is battleships. Just okay. That's where we are, I suppose. Feels a bit weird.
And it feels like we always come back to the feeling that developers don't really play their game, because I feel like you noticed that sort of battleships are the ones that counter subs, and you wanted destroyers to counter subs. It's like this. How does this work in their own logic, right? Like, this is something that's pretty obvious if you play the game. And then there is, like, I feel like, once again, the rock, paper, scissors principle. It should be more like the tank damage dealer support principle, because that's more what the game operates. Although support can be in many ways, from like radar support to line smoke screens to do spotting and so on, I feel like. And every ship does damage in that part. But if a ship's pure contribution, in a sense, is damage, then it should be very consistent in that. It's like if they actually focused on roles that ships can fulfill, and you feel like, this is one of the things, if you play this game, you can't not realize that there are certain roles that need filling. HMS Dreadnought, Submarine Hunter.
It would be a fairly substantial change in I think, how they go about designing things in the game. Definitely. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's what the game could really truly do with is that kind of shift. But I just, given what we know about how wargaming operates, I don't know if I think it's that likely that kind of shift would happen without basically somebody new coming into a kind of senior producer position or management position and going, right, this is now how I want things to be done.
Yeah, I remember I had an argument like when I think it was the deadline with, I don't remember with whom from Wargaming, not that it matters, but I had an argument where I tried to point out that they were like, sniping is a valid playstyle for battleships, and we need to provide something for sniping. And my point was, sniping is a valid playstyle for battleships only if there are other battleships that take like the pushing and tanking job. Because you need sometimes someone to lead a charge, and cruisers just get lol penned and overmatched. They can't fulfill the job. Obviously, you can't send a destroyer the destroyer can be there to do some torping, but it's not like the ship that pushes in. You need the battleship's health pool and armor or so to do that. And that's if it's a role that only a battleship can fill. And if none of your battleships are willing to do that, then you're probably gonna lose, right? So sniping battleship is something that you can have if it's encountered by somebody else who takes the role. Not every battleship needs to be a brawler, but you need some of or tank, right? But you need some of them to do the tanking job. And they didn't want to accept this point. It's like that doesn't compute in their brain, right? For them, it's like, ship is ship, and you play a ship I want. And almost sometimes I feel like wargaming doesn't understand that not every combination of ships is equally good as another combination of ships. Ship is not, ship. They have roles. So I think it's an empty dream that they'll ever realize that, but hey.
Well, I think that's about it for that article. I don't know if there's much else to say otherwise. I mean, it's just kind of like what you said at the start. It's nice that we're at least getting this much, but having picked through it, there definitely feels in some places anyway, a fairly big disconnect between what they're writing and how things really are in the game.
Yeah. It's to a large degree on what you'd want to hear. I mean, I don't agree with everything they write, but to a large degree, it's this is how a game should be balanced, but this is not what we're actually doing kind of article. Because you can write as much as you want, but if your actions just contradict that, then, it's just empty words. And what's said is that they are not saying this is our commitment, how we're going to do things in the future. They try to pretend that this is how they're doing things.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. I don't know if I'm that positive at the end of all this.
Yeah, it's more like, a bit of you get a chuckle out of it, or maybe a cry, then you move on with your life. And it probably won't change anything what they are doing, I'm afraid. But if they ever actually, wanna follow through with what they write, it would be a positive change for the game.
Yeah, definitely. We can hope.
It's all we can do.
Right, so shall we wrap things up then? This is actually this is one of those ones where at the start I was like, this might be a shorter one. We probably won't have that much to talk about. Yeah, okay. I should know better.
Over 2 hours later. So, yeah, I guess we just wrap it up then. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.
Bye.